What is so special about the Panasonic Lumix S5Iix? This is a question that I found myself asking a lot as I started to see more and more of the content creators, photographers, and videographers around me testing out this series of cameras. I found myself wanting to know what some of those features and functions are that make this camera stand out. So when Lumix reached out and asked if I would partner up, giving me the chance to try it out for myself, I was excited to take it for a spin and see what these standout features were. So now that I've had the camera and been shooting with it for a couple of months, I put together a list of 11 things that really stood out to me as to what makes this camera special. So secure the cup and let's dive in. One of the first things that stood out when I started using the S5Iix was the plethora of options available when it comes to choosing your video recording formats. It's almost overwhelming. Luckily, they've given us some tools to make things a bit easier. So we've got the 3 different recording file formats. We've got MP4 for quick delivery, MOV for kind of a middle ground of quality and file size. This is the one that I use most of the time. And then we've got ProRes for super high quality, but bigger file sizes. Then if we go to recording quality, this is where the options get a little intense. They've given us a way to filter them down to what we want though. So we can choose just to show the options with specific frame rates we want, so 120, 60, 48, 30, or 24. Then we can also filter the specific resolution and aspect ratio that we want, anywhere from 6K down to 1080, as well as 3:2, 17:9, 16:9, and 4:3 ratios. We can also filter by the specific codec that we want, including all intra and long op options, with some of the options having high and lower bitrate options within that as well. Or if you're shooting ProRes, you've got 422 or 422 HQ. And even in MP4 mode, you've got both 10-bit and 8-bit options to choose from. This is what I'm talking about. Even when I'm trying to explain it quickly and simply, there are just so many options. It's a lot. It's important to note here that as you filter down to choose for your specific needs, there are going to be limited options in those factors. You can't just mix and match any of these settings together that you want. For example, if you choose the 6K resolution, you can only get 24 or 30 frames per second in long GOP recording. Or if you choose 48 or 60 frames per second for slow motion in 4K, it's going to have an APS-C crop. So there are some limitations, but it's still an insane amount of options to choose from. And just to add to that, you can also put the camera operation frequency to cinema mode to get true 24 or 48 frames per second. And just to make this even more intense, and I'm realizing now that I probably could have stretched this into more than just my first point, you've also got the option to output raw video recording in ProRes RAW with an Atomos recorder, or to be RAW with the Blackmagic Video Assist recorder. Okay, I promise that's the last that I'll talk about the recording options. Kind of. So when you're going through the recording options, you may notice that some of them are grayed out, and that's because they require faster media than the SD cards can offer, and therefore you are able to plug in an SSD to the USB-C port and record externally. This is not only handy for being able to use these larger file formats, but also for workflow reasons. If you record to an SSD, you can transfer the files quicker, or you can even edit directly from that SSD if you want. On top of that, SSDs are getting cheaper and cheaper nowadays, and the cost per gigabyte is significantly lower than buying fast SD cards. Of course, the downside is that you have to mount an SSD somehow with like a small rig mounting unit, and there is an external cable which sometimes can cause problems if you bump it or something like that, so you definitely want to make sure that you're rigging things properly. I mentioned really quickly earlier the 3:2 ratio that's available for shooting, which brings us to the next awesome feature, which is the open gate mode. I did make a whole video on what this means and the benefits of it, but the long and short of it are that you're using the entire sensor size instead of cropping into a 16:9 ratio. And I've basically been shooting in the open gate 6K 3:2 ratio for everything that I possibly can since I got this camera. For me, the advantage comes down to having a ton of extra resolution for reframing in post-production. That means that I can crop into the 6K footage to make a 4K horizontal 16:9 version that's made for platforms like YouTube, and then I also have extra room on the top and bottom, so it is much easier to crop in for a vertical version for things like Instagram or TikTok. This may have been the thing that I was most excited about when getting this camera, and it has not disappointed at all. One of the functions that the S5 Mark II X has that makes shooting open gate for multiple deliverables easier is the custom frame markers. You can choose from a bunch of pre-made ones like 9:16 or 16:9 or some super widescreen formats, or you can create your own custom frame if you want. Then you can customize the color of the frame as well, and you can decide how much you want to mask the frame to make it visually a bit easier. I mapped this to a custom button as well, so that made it easy to turn on and off to quickly just check that I've got it wide enough for my vertical crop as well. And another thing that I found myself really enjoying about this camera was the button layout. This is something that always worries me. It's usually a big pain to test out a new camera with a completely different layout than what you're used to, but this actually turned out to be very intuitive and easy to use, to the point where I didn't even do too much customization. I really like the 3 side-by-side buttons up top. We've got the joystick with the center button, and we can customize a lot of the buttons just by holding them down and then picking what you want them to be. But the one button that I really like is just down to the right side of the viewfinder. On the inside, there's a toggle to choose the autofocus area, and once you're in there, you just hit up to toggle on or off human detection, as well as you can change the mode to face/eye detection or human and animal detection. Then around that center button, there is a 3-way switch that goes between continuous autofocus, single shot autofocus, and manual focus. And this switch gets used so much for me. I usually actually customize some button on every other camera to basically do this function, but it's so nice to have a dedicated switch for it. And while we're on the topic of autofocus, the next feature is the autofocus. With this generation of cameras, Panasonic Lumix has introduced the phase detect autofocus into their systems, and it's been performing great for me. Like I said before, we've got the ability to detect human, face and eye, or human and animal. I've mostly left it just on human, and it's done a great job not only at detecting the head, face, and eye of the subject, but also the body when the face isn't available. There are lots of options that you can customize, like showing the crosshairs for the face and eye, customize the speed and stickiness of the autofocus, but I basically have left it on default speed and had great results. This is a super important feature for me as someone who works alone and relies on autofocus a lot. A small but impactful feature on the Panasonic cameras that I love is the ability to set your shutter into shutter angle mode instead of specific shutter speeds. For me, this is a no-brainer. Just set it to 180 degrees, and no matter what frame rate you're in, the camera will do the math for you and adjust the shutter speed to get the optimal motion blur. Not that the math is particularly difficult to sort out if you don't have this option, but I can't tell you the amount of times that I've changed frame rates and then forgotten to change the shutter speed on cameras that don't have this feature. Human error sucks, and this gets rid of it. Another feature that this camera has is the ability to import LUTs into the camera so you can view them while you're shooting, aka monitor LUTs. If you're shooting in the vlog photo style, this can make getting the proper exposure so much easier since you can view a finished looking image instead of seeing the flat desaturated log image that you're actually recording. Then if you use that same LUT when you're in color grading, you know exactly how it's going to turn out. I have a full video on shooting in Panasonic's log photo style vlog and all of the benefits, and I talk about how using a monitor LUT as an exposure tool can make your life so much easier. And I even created my own exposed to the right vlog conversion LUT that you can download for free to help you with properly exposing. But that's not all you can do with LUTs in the S5 Mark II X. The photo style right beside vlog is called real-time LUT, which allows you to use those imported vlog LUTs to have a baked-in color grade right in your image. So if you have a specific LUT or color grade that you like to apply a lot of the time, you can actually do that right in the camera if you want to save yourself the time and hassle of doing it afterwards. This is super handy if you're trying to turn around a project super quickly and you're confident with your LUT that you want to use. I personally still find myself shooting in vlog a lot of the time because I like to color grade and it gives me full control afterwards, but it is a really nice feature to have. The S5 Mark II X also offers some exposure and color scope options that you don't often see on cameras in this price range. So for example, it's pretty standard to see a histogram on mirrorless cameras like this to help you judge exposure, but you often have to use an external monitor to get things like a waveform. But on the S5 Mark II X, we've got the waveform built right in. We've also got a vector scope if we want, and we can resize them and move them around as we like. I've got my waveforms actually set to a custom button so that I can show or hide them when I need to. And the last thing that I think really makes this camera is the price, or more specifically, the value. With its full frame sensor, all of the features that it has, everything that I just mentioned, and the quality that it offers, the S5 Mark II X has outstanding value for its price compared to similar full frame mirrorless cameras on the market. It's got a decent amount of features that you don't see on what I would consider its direct competitors, and it generally comes in about $300 to $500 US less than them. And on top of that, there are a ton of different lens combination kits that you can choose from that make it an even better deal. Now, this will vary depending on what promotions are going on at the time that you're looking, but even just on the base retail price, I still think that this is a great value. I'll leave links to my other Panasonic Lumix S5 Mark II X videos down in the description if you want to dig in a little bit deeper, as well as links to the camera and some other related products you might be interested in. As always, I want to hear from you. Let me know down in the comments if there are more features on the S5 IIX that you think make it stand out. And on your way down there, hit that like and subscribe button. Huge thank you to Lumix for sponsoring this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.